Welcome back to Resident Strangers. I'm Sarah Schalow, and as always, I'm joined in the studio by Steve Engram and Rich Holland. So we're going to be continuing our conversation from last week, talking about missions and all that that entails. But before we get into that, I have a question for both of you. Did you ever change your major in college?
No.
No?
I sort of did.
Okay.
I really couldn't change it very much because I went to Virginia Tech. Oh, we did Virginia Tech a couple of episodes ago. We talked about that a little while
Hokies.
ago. Yeah. So I had
gobblers
don't sing it
gobbler.
again. Yeah.
I won't do the cheer
Gobblers
again.
or whatever.
Yeah. So I went in on a Army scholarship, and that was tied to my major. And so I went in saying I was going to be an aerospace engineer, and that was way too hard. And so
you want to be a podcaster instead?
Yeah, that's right. So I switched to mechanical engineering. So, but I had to stay. But then I had to. I forget exactly what I had to do, but the Army had to agree that I could be a mechanical engineer too and still keep my scholarship. So
okay, but you're not a mechanical engineer.
I'm not, and you should be glad that I'm not a mechanical engineer. I barely made it out of there with an engineering degree.
Wow.
So did you switch your major?
Pretty radically.
What?
Really?
From
So-
what to what?
You went in for dental.
No, I actually went in for missions.
Oh, wow.
I went on that trip to Kenya, literally graduated high school the next day, flew to Kenya for a 2.5-week trip. I felt very affected by that trip in good ways, but also I do feel a little bit, it really affected me. And I thought, I need to be a missionary. I want to be a missionary. So I was committed to my school for musical theater, and I switched to missions. So I did 1 semester, and the further I was getting into the classes, the more I was realizing how big of a commitment it is. And I know that might sound dumb, like how did I not? But it was just, I was kind of on this emotional high from the trip, and I'm in some of the classes, and we had to write this paper on, it's freshman year, but they're like, where do you see yourself on the mission field in 10 years? And I literally couldn't write the paper. And I think I wrote it so I could pass the class, but I just was like, I can't answer this. And so it really took me on this whole other journey of realizing that I did want to, be in a ministry setting. So obviously I'm here now, but yeah, so I changed my major like 3 times, but but I'm here now.
Did you go back to music? What'd you say?
I went
theater?
to music,
but not
not worship or anything like that.
Yeah.
No, not theater. I wasn't going to make it. I had to tell myself I wasn't going to make it on Broadway, but this is a whole other conversation about my life. But no, the reason I bring that up is because I think it can be, I think as Christians, we would view a missionary as a very noble thing to do. It's a very, I don't know what word I'm looking for here, but so I didn't necessarily, like, as a Christian, when I was saying, oh, I want to be a missionary, I don't feel that I had people around me that were really able to talk me through that. And because it's like, what Christian is going to say, no, you shouldn't be a missionary.
Yeah.
But I kind of wish I'd had some people maybe saying, hey, like, let's talk about this. Like, what does that mean? And all
I
that.
think you probably, just trying to think of age and time and where this would have been.
17
There's been
years old.
There's been a real switch. So when I was growing up, and you said you wanted to go to the mission field, or you felt called to be a missionary, it was you were surrendering the rest of your life to being somewhere, someplace that isn't here.
Yeah.
And that's how we did it. I mean, that was the sense. God, I go wherever you want me to go, do whatever you want me to do. And that was the mindset. There's been a real shift in missions because I think that was more, I'm kind of the end of the boomer generation, right? And I think as others come on, making a commitment for
life.
I mean,
When
really,
you're 18.
making a commitment for next week sometimes is a little tougher.
Yeah.
And honestly, this has been a hard transition for a lot of mission agencies because there just aren't, the younger generation coming up is not, they're willing to go for a period of time. They're willing to go kind of check it out, but that, and you could look at all kind of, whether it's commitment level or just wanting to have freedom with plans, or just not being sure. I mean, there's lots of different ways that you can look at it, but I know mission organizations are having to have had to undergo, and those that have done this better, are thriving, and the old school ones, which are kind of looking for, lifelong career missionaries, they're shrinking. But trying to learn, okay, so how can we take a mission opportunity for a few weeks or a couple months and maybe see how we can, if God's at work in their heart, leverage that into maybe more like a 1 or 2 year, and then let that maybe leverage them into God's calling them for the next 5 to 10 years. Instead of kind of up front, you're signing your life away.
Yeah.
Where do you see yourself on the mission field in 10 years?
Well, don't you think some of that, at least one component of that is sort of the technology of travel? Like if you think back to the old days.
Yeah, that's
you
true.
know, it was very, very costly, and it took a lot of time and a lot of resources to get somebody from, let's say if it was international, from here to somewhere else around the world. And there just wasn't the resources or technology available to sort of go back and forth and back and forth.
Well, if my wife were here, she would tell you she was 4 years old, and they got on a freighter out of San Francisco,
sailed the Pacific Ocean
all the way over to the Philippines,
Yeah.
and they got in between 3 typhoons. That's she doesn't like the ocean to this day. I was just talking to somebody, they had never heard the word furlough.
Yeah, it came up at Pizza with a Pastor.
Okay.
I feel like in COVID, furlough was like, all these people were getting furloughed.
From a missionary standpoint.
Okay.
So back in the day, because of the cost, because of the distance, missionaries would go for a 4-year period of time, and typically almost every missionary at the end of 4 years would do a furlough where they would come back to the United States for both rest and also to visit the supporting churches and people, and then they would go back. But anymore, with travel being so cheap and being able to just even the technology, I think, of being able to. So my wife will tell the story of when her,
because she grew up on the mission
she
field.
grew up on the mission field, and when her aunt was killed in an automobile accident by a drunk driver, and I forget how long it took to get them a wire.
Just to tell them. And by the time they got the wire, I mean, the funeral, and there's no way they could have gotten back anyway. But, and today, my son goes to Japan, and, I'm talking to him in real time. And
Right.
it's just a completely different day in which we live.
I heard the other day that it was somebody posted something. It was cheaper for them to go to Disney in Tokyo than it was to go to Disney in California. Some weird circumstance.
Including airfare and stuff.
Airfare and hotel and everything or whatever. Yeah.
Wow.
That's a whole other conversation about our economy and all that.
But the point is that it's easier to move around. And
Yes.
it's understandable, I think, that if a young person grows up in a world where it's very easy, or relatively speaking, easier to travel, where they might be more interested in going on a short-term trip or something like that, as opposed to committing to these long-term things.
Well, and I think just to speak a little more on my experience, and then I want to get into what we wanted to talk about in this episode. But I think looking back, I had gone on that trip. I went to a Christian high school, so that was who the trip was with. And I think looking back in hindsight, it goes to show the importance of being a part of a church. Because again, I had this really great experience. I mean, it did affect my life in a positive way, but it was also a very emotional experience. And I wish that I had some good counsel around me just to kind of talk me through some of those things. Not to say that they should have just right away said, oh yeah, you're not going to be a missionary, but kind of just saying, okay, if you do this, this is more than just that 2-week experience that you had. I think that, and this can happen in ministry too. Sometimes people aren't fully realizing what they're getting into and what it means to make that kind of commitment. So I'm glad that I didn't end up, because I don't know the burnout or whatever could have happened. You don't want to play the what if game too much, but
and that's why even here we have found that training and preparation for a short-term trip is really important, to set right expectations, to also kind of give an overview so that people have an idea of what's going to be happening. And because a lot of times people go thinking, they would never say this, but almost this idea, well, it's going to be a little bit of a vacation. And I think every mission trip I've been on, I come back exhausted from, because not just because of travel, but because of all the ministry opportunity that you're trying to squeeze in while you do that. And so if you do go on a missions trip, highly recommend it, but hopefully whoever you're going with will provide some training, some preparing, just to prepare you for what's coming. You know, we talk about some of the cultural things and understanding that, being respectful of that. You know, I went to Japan last spring or last fall, I guess it was. Yeah. And it is such a different culture. And it's a very respectful culture. And if you don't show respect, then it creates some real problems. So anyway.
Well, something that we talked about last week a little bit, we touched on this idea of serving. I mean, literally serving. So meeting felt needs, whether it's medical or, you know, I feel like there's the classic building a house or building a kitchen for a little church or something. And then the actual evangelizing and sharing the gospel. Can you have one without the other and it be considered a mission trip? Can you assign the term mission trip to both of those scenarios, or must it be both and?
So are you asking us, or are you asking what do most people think?
I'm just posing the question. So however you all want to go. Rich, you're chomping at the bit over here.
No,
so.
I think the short answer is no, but I would want to nuance it. I would want to qualify it. I would say, no, you can't really separate them in that way.
So it has to be the both and.
But I guess yes. I think... Right, it's we're not fulfilling the Great Commission. We're not being a witness to Jesus if we're not saying something about Jesus, right? And I think there has to be something that distinguishes me doing service from whatever, the Knights of Columbus or whoever it is, some other, you know, charitable organization that's going and doing service. So, right, so I think we ought to be, as Christians, we ought to be enthusiastic about service projects. I'm not trying to minimize that in any way.
No.
We should be enthusiastic about meeting people's physical, material needs. You talked about medical things. You hear about construction projects and all different kinds of things. That's really important. But I don't think it's missions unless we have in view that we are trying to introduce people to Jesus. And
by sharing the gospel. Yeah.
And I think there's all sorts of nuance, I think, that could come up, and all sorts of contextual things that sort of helps us figure all that out. The example that's coming to my mind right now is after Hurricane Katrina, which that was a long time ago. When was that? That was like in the early 2000s.
I was in elementary school.
So it was a long time ago. But so the Southern Baptist Convention has a big seminary, or it's not very big, but it's a seminary presence in New Orleans. And after Hurricane Katrina, the Southern Baptists, they have a pretty well-organized kind of an effort where when things like this happen, they come in, they help people clean up.
Disaster relief.
Yeah, disaster relief. And so after Hurricane Katrina, the Southern Baptists in New Orleans were mobilized, and they were going all over the city of New Orleans doing all kinds of cool stuff, right? And I don't think it was one of those things where they were going and preaching to people. but they lived there. This is like New Orleans. This is part of the community, and they were just serving. They were cleaning up. They were helping people repair homes. And what that did for them was that there were newspaper articles that came out in that time essentially comparing Southern Baptists to the local government and saying the government couldn't get anything done, and if you wanted something done, you call the Baptists. And that's an example where all they were doing was cleaning up. They were helping people repair their homes, but it was in the context of a community where that allowed them to have a voice for Jesus, if that makes sense what I'm saying.
Yeah, and I would venture to say, knowing some people who are actually kind of disaster relief, is their primary purpose is to go and to provide the physical relief that people need. But they're always sensitive to the spiritual needs and praying with people, because so often, people have lost everything or they've lost a loved one. And so as they're clearing trees or helping take down a part of a home and board it up so that the rest of it stays, they're dealing with hurting people, and they minister Jesus to them. And often that does turn into gospel conversations.
Yeah.
And so the primary focus of what they're doing is the work part.
Because that's what needs to be done in the moment.
But they also understand that, eternally, this other is actually of more value. And so as the Lord gives opportunity, as they're able to, but you also, in that moment with the grieving person, you don't do that. You pray with them and you minister to them. But you never know what door that's going to open. But you have to, I think, have, from the standpoint of even looking at Jesus, he didn't just do random miracles for no purpose. It was always for that sake of sharing the gospel message, of sharing with people who he was, of pointing people to what he was saying. And so I do think, and it's a hard thing, because if you look at the history of missions, for instance, hospitals. So, most hospitals, and even kind of the original ideas, came from Christians.
Yep.
In fact, when I moved here, a lot of the hospitals were, Saint whatever, right?
Yeah.
And they're not called that anymore. And the hard thing is once you get meeting physical needs, because physical needs can be so overwhelming in the moment that it's easy at times to lose the sight for the other. And that's what I think you have to be careful about is, we're here primarily to meet physical needs, but ultimately there's a bigger need, and it's a spiritual need. Jesus understood that. That's why he came to die. That was the primary thing. It was a spiritual need. And to always keep that at the forefront. But even if you look at a lot of secular organizations today, or what are perceived as secular, if you go back in history, they were actually started as a Christian organization. But the need aspect of it, the physical needs, became so overwhelming that the other lost sight. And I think as Christians, what we're called to do is to hold both of those very, very closely. And again, it doesn't mean that, you see people in need and you're just going to preach the gospel no matter where they're at, because you actually can be pushing them away from Jesus, right? You've got to meet the immediate needs. That's what Jesus did. But it provided them the opportunity to be able to then deal with the spiritual needs.
So the question I have is about people who go on mission trips that are focused on service. And we've done that here, right? We've had folks go to Nicaragua and other places, even here locally in Arizona. And Sarah, you told your story about going with the dental thing where you were doing dentistry without a license. Right. And I think you even said you weren't involved in gospel conversations. And I guess the question I have is, or maybe it's not a question, it's a comment. I don't think this means you have to feel bad if you don't have a gospel conversation.
Yeah.
Because you were talking a second ago about holding both things, but we also sort of have to have a big picture, because I might go on a service-oriented mission trip. I'm going into a context where there is a Christian missionary who's there, who is telling people about Jesus
Right.
and working sort of long-term, building relationships. And it might be the perfect thing for me to come in and sweep the floor or build the house
Right.
or whatever. And that's doing something
Yes.
big picture, right?
Exactly.
Well, and we had actually set up our clinic in a church. I don't remember the connection how that all came about, but the clinic was actually inside a church. So the community was obviously connecting where they were. And we did have people on our team that were having the gospel conversations.
Yeah.
And sometimes I think it's even simply balancing the time and place, kind of like what you're saying. If someone is literally, and this is extreme, but someone is literally, bleeding and they need help.
Let me tell you about Jesus.
Maybe it's like, okay, let's get this under control for a second here. Let's meet that physical need. But it's the intentionality of then saying, because kind of like you're saying, not allowing the physical need to overwhelm the spiritual.
Yeah, I remember one night I was knocking on doors. We were looking for people who had visited the church, and obviously our goal was we'd love to share the gospel with them. But as the person came to the door, and we got talking, come to find out the person she had come to church with was no longer in the house, and he had been abusing her.
Mm-hmm.
And so obviously in that moment, right. The need is for the immediate, because she broke down.
Yeah.
And so we were able, hopefully, to give her some good counsel, to pray with her, to extend help for some immediate needs that she had, that, at a different time would hopefully give us that opportunity to talk to her about her Jesus. God, I don't know where she was in that moment. So we need to be sensitive to those things. But I really like what you said, which is and Rich, what you said is that one of the things that we always try to do, like when we're doing a work project, is if you can tie it to a church or to a ministry that is getting the gospel out, and let them, in essence, take the credit, the good graces in the community for what you're coming to do. Because sometimes, because of language barrier, you really need them to share the gospel anyway, because they don't speak English and you don't speak whatever their language is. And so if you can use your physical gifts to be able to platform them in a way where they're going to be able to share the gospel with the people in the community, then very much that's a mission trip. You are promoting the gospel going forward. And I think something that's great. Encourage you to do.
Yeah. It sounds like what I'm drawing out of this is that it really all comes down to intentionality. And that's so much of our Christian walk. That's what it comes down to. Meeting physical needs is important and a wonderful thing. And like you said, Steve, we saw Jesus do that time and time and time again. But we should always take that opportunity to take it to what ultimately matters in light
Eternally.
of eternity. So thank you all so much for joining us. We hope these last 2 weeks were helpful. We hope it provided some insight into missions and what all of that entails. We look forward to talking with you more this spring. We will see you next week.